It's easy to imagine that the great oceans were once impassable barriers. When we look at a modern map, we just see these vast, empty stretches of blue. Our minds, fill up with thoughts of GPS screens, digital charts, and the steady hum of an engine. We tend to assume that without these tools, crossing such a void would be impossible. But, for thousands of years, ancient mariners did exactly that. They launched their vessels from familiar shores and sailed out into the unknown, successfully reaching distant lands across thousands of miles of open water. These weren't journeys of blind luck or desperate gambles. Instead, they were feats of incredible skill, observation, and a profound connection to the natural world, a connection that we've almost entirely forgotten in our modern age. These sailors had a different kind of map, one that wasn't printed on paper but was instead written in the sky, the water, and the wind. They carried their navigational instruments not in a wooden box, but within their own minds and bodies. Their senses were finely tuned to the subtle language of the environment. They could feel a change in the ocean's rhythm through the soles of their feet. They could read the direction of a steady wind in the patterns of the clouds. This was a holistic system of wayfinding, built on a deep and intimate understanding of the world around them. A world that was not empty, but full of signs and clues for anyone who knew how to look and listen. The key to their success was really a shift in thinking. Modern navigation is often about pinpointing an exact position, a set of coordinates, on a grid. Ancient navigation, though, was more about orientation. It was about maintaining a constant and known relationship with the powerful, ever-present forces of nature. Instead of asking, "Where am I exactly?" the ancient mariner would ask, "Am I still on my path?" They knew their heading by feeling the push of a persistent ocean swell against the hull of their boat. They held their course by keeping a specific star just off the bow as it rose, or set. This was navigation as a continuous conversation with the ocean, not just a periodic consultation with a single, fallible device. In this essay, we'll explore the lost secrets of these masterful navigators. We'll journey back in time to understand how they crossed the formidable Atlantic and other great oceans without the aid of a magnetic compass or a satellite signal. We'll uncover how they used the sun, the stars, the waves, the wind, and even the flight of birds to find their way. And honestly, this isn't just a story about history, it's a lesson in observation, awareness, and the remarkable human ability to find a path through the wilderness. It's a reminder that the most powerful navigational tool we've ever possessed is the one we're all born with, our own observant mind. These days, we think of the compass as the most basic and essential tool for navigation. We see it as this simple, reliable pointer that always shows us the way north. However, for those early sailors venturing out onto the vast expanse of the Atlantic, the magnetic compass was not the dependable instrument we know it to be. The earliest marine compasses were often, fragile and pretty crude devices. A magnetized needle would be floated in a bowl of water, making it highly susceptible to being disturbed by the pitching and rolling of a ship in rough seas. A sudden lurch or a big wave could easily send the water sloshing, rendering the needle's reading completely useless at the very moment it was needed most. Furthermore, the knowledge surrounding magnetism itself was limited and honestly shrouded in mystery. Sailors didn't fully understand the force that guided the needle. They knew it pointed roughly north, but they were also aware of its strange quirks. They discovered that the needle didn't point to the true geographical North Pole, but to a separate magnetic pole. This difference, known as magnetic declination or variation, changes depending on where you are on Earth's surface. Without accurate charts to correct for this variation, a compass could lead a ship hundreds of miles off course over a long voyage. Trusting it blindly was a recipe for disaster, forcing sailors to rely on other, more consistent signs. Another significant problem was the compass's vulnerability to local magnetic interference. The wooden ships of ancient times were increasingly being built with iron fittings, nails, and anchors. Cannons and other metal objects brought aboard could create their own magnetic fields, pulling the delicate compass needle away from its alignment with Earth's magnetic field. A sailor might not even realize that a nearby piece of iron was corrupting their only directional instrument, leading them to follow a false heading day after day. This unreliability meant that the compass could only be used as a secondary reference, a tool to be consulted cautiously rather than followed faithfully. It couldn't be the primary guide for a long ocean crossing. Because of these inherent flaws, experienced mariners placed far more trust in the predictable and constant patterns of nature than they did in the fickle needle floating in its bowl. They saw the compass as a helpful aid for short periods, maybe on a calm and overcast day when the sun and stars were hidden. But for the serious business of crossing an entire ocean, they knew that true, reliable direction came from the environment itself. The sun's daily journey across the sky, the steadfast position of the North Star, and the unrelenting push of the ocean swells. These were their real compasses. These natural guides were immune to the ship's roll and free from metallic interference, making them the foundation of their navigational system. Long before they looked to the sky, ancient mariners first learned to read the water beneath them. The surface of the ocean is rarely still. It's a dynamic and textured landscape, just full of information. The most important of these features was the ocean swell. Unlike the chaotic, wind-driven waves that change direction with every passing squall, a swell is a pattern of deep, regular, and powerful waves generated by distant storms, sometimes thousands of miles away. These swells travel across the entire ocean basin from a consistent direction. For a sailor on the Atlantic, a long, rolling swell coming from the west was a reliable and ever-present directional sign, as steady as a painted line on a road. Navigators learned to identify the primary swell and distinguish it from the more temporary local wind waves. They could do this by observing its length, the distance between crests, and its period, the time it took for two successive crests to pass a single point. A true ocean swell has a long wavelength and a slow, rhythmic period. By keeping the boat angled in a constant way relative to this dominant swell, a captain could maintain a steady course for days on end, even when clouds obscured the sun and stars. The swell acted as a giant, tactile compass rose, felt through the very structure of the ship. A navigator could feel the rhythm of the ship rising, falling, and rolling as it met the waves, instantly sensing if the vessel had strayed from its intended path. This was a skill honed through years of experience, becoming second nature to the crew. A seasoned sailor would not even need to look at the water. They could be below deck, in the dark, and know their heading simply by the motion of the ship. They could feel the subtle shift from a gentle side-to-side roll, which indicated they were traveling parallel to the swell, to a more jarring, pitching motion, which meant they had turned into it. This sensory connection to the ocean was a fundamental part of their navigational toolkit. It was a constant physical dialogue between the mariner and the sea, providing immediate feedback that was more intuitive and often more reliable than any mechanical instrument of the time. This technique was not just for maintaining a single direction. By understanding the typical swell patterns of a particular ocean region, sailors could even execute more complex navigational plans. For example, they might know that to reach a certain island, they needed to sail with the primary swell on their port quarter, until they began to feel a secondary, shorter swell from another direction. This new swell might be a sign that they were nearing a different current system or coming under the influence of land. The ocean surface was a complex map of intersecting lines, and by learning to read these lines, ancient mariners could navigate with a precision that seems almost impossible to us today. When the sun shone, it was the mariner's most obvious and reliable guide. Its path across the sky marked out the fundamental directions of east and west. At dawn, the point where the sun broke the horizon gave a clear bearing for east. At dusk, its descent marked the west. While this point shifts slightly with the seasons, an experienced navigator would be acutely aware of this gradual change and could account for it. At midday, the sun reached its highest point in the sky, a moment known as the meridian passage. In the northern hemisphere, the sun would be due south at this time, providing an unmistakable directional fix. By simply observing the sun's arc, a sailor could orient themselves with confidence during daylight hours. At night, the heavens opened up to reveal an even more detailed map. The stars provided a multitude of fixed reference points. In the northern hemisphere, Polaris, the North Star, was the ultimate anchor. Because it sits almost directly above the Earth's North Pole, it appears to remain stationary in the sky while all other stars revolve around it. A sailor could find their latitude, their north-south position, simply by measuring the angle of Polaris above the horizon. They did this not with complex sextants, but by using their own hands. By holding their hand at arm's length, they could measure the star's height in fingers or palms, a consistent unit of measurement that allowed them to know if they were sailing north, south, or maintaining a steady east-west course. Memorization was the key to this celestial navigation. Sailors committed the entire night sky to memory, learning the major constellations and the paths of the brightest stars. They knew which stars rose in the east and set in the west at different times of the year. They created star compasses, mental maps that divided the horizon into points marked by the rising and setting positions of specific stars. To sail east on a particular night, they might aim their bow toward the rising point of a star like Altair. As Altair climbed higher in the sky, they would switch their focus to another star that was just beginning to rise in the same spot, allowing them to maintain their heading throughout the night. The wind also played a crucial role, especially in regions with predictable trade winds. In many parts of the Atlantic, the wind blows from the same direction for months on end. Sailors knew these patterns intimately. A steady northeasterly trade wind was not just a force to fill their sails. It was a directional indicator as reliable as a compass needle. By observing the direction of the wind, by feeling it on their face, watching the flag or pennant, and seeing its effect on the waves, they could hold a course. This atmospheric information, combined with the celestial map above and the ocean swell below, created a rich three-dimensional system of navigation that was robust and multi-layered. As a ship drew closer to its destination after a long voyage, the signs of nature began to change, offering a new set of clues. Among the most welcome of these were birds. While some seabirds, like albatrosses, spend their entire lives far out at sea, many others nest on land and have a limited foraging range. The sight of certain species, like terns or gannets, was a near-certain indicator that land was not far away. An experienced navigator would not only recognize the species but also observe its behavior. Birds, flying purposefully in a straight line at dawn, were likely heading out from their nests to feed, pointing the way back to their island home. The same birds returning in a similar fashion at dusk confirmed the direction of the nearest landmass. The sky itself also held clues about what lay over the horizon. The formation of clouds could betray the presence of an island long before it was visible. A stationary pile of cumulus clouds on an otherwise clear day was often a sign of land. As warm, moist air flows over an island, it is forced to rise and cool, causing its moisture to condense into a cloud that hovers directly above the landmass. This cloud cap acted like a beacon in the sky. Similarly, the color of the sky near the horizon could be informative. The underside of clouds might reflect the greenish tint of a shallow lagoon, or the dark hue of a volcanic island, providing a color-coded clue to the navigator who was observant enough to notice. The water, too, would change its character as land approached. The deep, dark blue of the open ocean would gradually give way to a lighter shade of green or turquoise, indicating shallower depths. The pattern of the waves would also be altered. The long, regular ocean swell would become confused or refracted as it began to interact with the seabed. Sometimes, a reflected swell could be detected, bouncing back from a coastline that was still out of sight. Mariners would also watch for floating debris like coconuts, driftwood, or seaweed. The type and freshness of this flotsam could tell them not only that land was near, but potentially what kind of land it was. Finally, the very air the sailors breathed could carry the scent of land. After weeks of smelling nothing but salt spray, The faintest aroma could be a powerful sign. The earthy smell of damp soil after a rain shower, the sweet fragrance of flowering plants, or even the smoke from a cooking fire could travel many miles out to sea on a favorable wind. For a crew whose senses were heightened by the sensory deprivation of the open ocean, these smells were as clear as a shout. These living signposts, the birds, the clouds, the water, and the scents, were the final pieces of the puzzle, guiding sailors through the last, most critical miles of their journey to a safe landfall. While natural clues provided the primary directional bearings, ancient mariners integrated these observations into a systematic process known as dead reckoning. The term dead is likely a shortened form of deduced, meaning deduced reckoning. It was a method of calculating a ship's position by tracking its course and speed from a known starting point. This was not simple guesswork, it was a disciplined and continuous process that involved the entire crew. The navigator or captain would set the intended course using the stars or swells, but it was the collective experience of the crew that kept the ship on that course and monitored its progress through the water. The ship's speed was a critical part of the calculation. In the absence of modern logs, sailors estimated speed with remarkable accuracy through pure observation. They might watch a piece of wood or a patch of sea foam as it passed along the hull, timing its transit between two marked points on the ship. They would count the seconds, often using a memorized chant or a simple sandglass to make the measurement consistent. This process would be repeated regularly, and the results would be mentally logged. They understood that the ship's speed was not constant, it changed with the wind's strength and the state of the sea. Constant vigilance was required to keep the dead reckoning calculation as accurate as possible. This system was fundamentally a form of shared memory. The navigator did not just keep the information in their own head. The knowledge of the course, the estimated speed, and the time traveled were shared among the senior members of the crew. They would discuss their observations, comparing what they felt in the ship's motion with what they saw in the sky and the water. This constant dialogue served as a crucial cross-check, reducing the chance of a single individual's error, leading the entire vessel astray. The ship's progress was a story that everyone was helping to write, a narrative built from 1,000 small observations made by many different people over days and weeks. Discipline was the backbone of this communal system. Every observation had to be made with care and reported honestly. A lapse in concentration could corrupt the entire calculation. Each sailor had a role to play, from the helmsman keeping the ship true to the swell, to the lookout watching for changes in the water or sky. This shared responsibility fostered a deep sense of a collective purpose and mutual reliance. The dead reckoning position was their best guess of where they were, a mental pin on an imaginary map. It was a fragile position, always subject to the uncertainties of currents and leeway, but it was the anchor for their entire navigational strategy, and it was held together by the disciplined, collaborative effort of the whole crew. The rich and complex art of natural navigation began to fade with the arrival of more reliable and easier-to-use technologies, as the magnetic compass was improved with gimbals to keep it level and better shielding from interference. It became a more trustworthy tool. The invention of the chronometer in the 18th century was an even bigger revolution. This highly accurate clock allowed sailors to determine their longitude precisely for the first time, transforming navigation from an art of estimation into a science of calculation. With the chronometer and the sextant, a navigator could fix their position with unprecedented accuracy, and the need to read the subtle signs of nature diminished rapidly. This knowledge, which had been passed down through generations via apprenticeships and oral traditions, was never written down in a comprehensive way. It was a practical skill, learned by doing and by listening to the wisdom of elders on the deck of a ship. As new generations of sailors were trained to use charts, tables, and instruments, the old ways were simply not taught. They were seen as obsolete and imprecise. The ability to feel the direction of a swell or to identify the flight patterns of land-finding birds was no longer considered an essential maritime skill. Within a few generations, this vast body of environmental knowledge, accumulated over millennia, had all but vanished from common practice. The arrival of GPS and other satellite navigation systems in the late 20th century seemed to be the final nail in the coffin for these ancient skills. Today, anyone with a smartphone can know their exact position on the planet to within a few feet. This technology is incredibly powerful and has made navigation safer and more efficient than ever before. However, our increasing reliance on it has come at a cost. We have outsourced the fundamental human skill of finding our way to a machine. We no longer need to look up at the sky or pay attention to the world around us. We have become passengers on our own planet, following the instructions of a digital voice rather than engaging our own senses and intellect. Yet, there is a growing recognition of what has been lost and a renewed interest in reviving these skills. For sailors, hikers, and anyone who ventures into the wild, natural navigation offers a powerful backup system for when technology fails. A dead battery or a lost signal can leave a modern navigator completely helpless, but beyond its practical survival value, relearning this art is about something deeper. It is about reconnecting with the world in a more meaningful way. It encourages us to be more observant, more aware, and more in tune with the natural rhythms of our environment. It reminds us that the world is not an empty space between destinations, but a rich and fascinating landscape full of clues, waiting for us to learn how to read them again.